Thank you, Abnu Chauhan. At the outset, I must thank NICE for inviting me to this excellent conclave. I have to say, I have enjoyed the discussion so far, the two presentations made by Satu, Dr. Olapalli, and of course, the excellent show by initial few slides by Admiral Chauhan. I can't help feel that, all that needs to be said on the issue of the Indo-Pacific and the Quad has in some ways already been covered. And in more thoughtful and eloquent fashion than I could have hoped to do. But I think I'll limit myself to just three basic observations to highlight three salient aspects, I think, of India's approach to the Indo-Pacific as also the Quad, simply for the reason that I think this is going to be important going forward. First, I think the central idea of the Indo-Pacific, as has been reiterated a number of times, is that it is not an exclusive club. And I think that despite all of the turbulences and disturbances that one has seen in the past year, caused by China's aggression on India's border, the skirmish that we saw happen in Ladakh, as also COVID, Delhi's approach to the Indo-Pacific remains inclusive and all-encompassing. Now, I think there has been some pressure from the US, at least some subtle nudging perhaps by the Biden administration, to instrumentalize the Indo-Pacific. And we know for a fact that the Biden administration is keen to formalize the Quad and stand it up as some sort of a sword arm or a pointy end of the Indo-Pacific, just as a way of balancing China. And despite that, I think India remains firmly on the path that was set by Prime Minister Modi in his 2018 Shangri-La address, when he said that, we're not a containment strategy, not a club, we're open to everybody. But I find it more interesting that in the pre-COVID era, before the pandemic came in, during President Trump's time in office, it had seemed for a while that there were not one versions, but two versions of the free and open Indo-Pacific. One, America's confrontational model, that was built around, great power competition and strategic balancing, which I would argue still is quite the case. And India, ASEAN, you can say Japanese strategy or approach, more of a conciliatory, collegial version of the Indo-Pacific that prioritized inclusion, bridge building, and a form of stakeholdership. Yet, after the events in Ladakh, India had briefly seemed to drift towards the US model. Right after the Galwan incident, which we lost 20 soldiers, there was a sense that, this was not the old approach. Indian military was on high alert. Warships were deployed forward. The army formations were fortified. One got the sense that things were heating up. But fortunately, that phase didn't last too long. Things settled down, and we veered back on the course that had been originally set. Today, I think India is reaching out to Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia, Quad partners, trying to stitch up partnerships. And in a variety of areas, be it vaccines, infrastructure, technology, resilient supply chains, everything. But you don't get to hear too much about security. India does not quite discuss the China issue with some of these countries, even though they are close partners. And my sense is that the US, in the past few months at least, has been more understanding of the competitive elements of that of the Indo-Pacific. To understand, this is not just about countering China, it's also about competing with China in a number of these areas that I've mentioned. And therefore, I think at the G7 meeting just a few days ago, the Build Back Better initiative was discussed. It's no coincidence that the US brought this issue up. And that, I think, is an appreciation of the Indian approach, perhaps the Japanese approach, that, we need to look for areas in which we can build alternatives for regional states beyond just focusing on countering China in the Indo-Pacific region. My second observation is that, beyond a mere convergence of interest, this is the rhetoric we always hear, this convergence of interest, so let's all come together. What we are now witnessing in the Indo-Pacific is really a confluence of thought. So again, as I said, it's no coincidence that we're talking about things like, security of sea lanes, freedom of navigation at sea and the skies, commercial access, investment rules, transparency in lending practices. There is a new realization that we need to evolve what is now being seen as a normative framework to tackle not just the hard security questions of China, but non-traditional security issues that matter to the smaller Pacific countries and to smaller Indian Ocean states. So this is really the comprehensive approach, the Sagar strategy that Admiral Chauhan spoke about. And so beyond deterrence and hard security issues, what we are talking today is, marine governance, security of the commons, multipolar approach. I think that all is very much, a sort of narrative that the region appreciates. It's a developmental creed that a lot of nations identify with. My third observation, this will be my last observation, is that partner states are more conceptually aligned, and yet they are operationally disparate, which really means that we agree strategically and politically on a number of things, but when it comes to hard operations on the ground, each one seems to have their own agenda, their own appreciation of what is feasible, what is not. And so some say what we are witnessing is really a splintering of the Indo-Pacific concept. India sees this as one integrated space, whereas a lot of Western powers, in the way they approach this operationally, tend to prioritize the Pacific. It's the more contested zone. It's the most strategically consequential region over the Indian Ocean, which is really seen as a highway. It's seen as a conduit for trade. This, again, is something that is worrisome, and that is going to have repercussions and ramifications going forward. And therefore, not surprisingly, I sense divisions within the Quad. I think India and Japan are not on the same page as perhaps the US and Australia, that would like to formalize the Quad, that would like to do much more in terms of military posturing and positioning and countering China. Even though, I agree, there's been a lot of discussions on vaccines, on technology, connectivity, supply chains, yet I think the US focus continues to remain on security, which going forward is a thing that we need to be careful about. Europe also, I have to say, has come up with these Indo-Pacific strategies, but it's very clear that they are more focused on the Pacific. They're talking about their relationships with ASEAN, but they're not so much into the Indian Ocean region. They believe India can take care of security on the Indian Ocean side. And so to conclude, I will simply say this, that there's the old aphorism that the more things change, the more they remain the same. And I think that is very much at play. I think China continues to be a troublesome actor in the South China Sea as well as the Indian Ocean region. The salami slicing that we have seen in the South China Sea, I think is happening now on the border with India. It's also beginning to happen gradually in the Indian Ocean region. China remains pivotal actor in the geo-economic realm. They are still the go-to actor when it comes to funding for a lot of these infrastructure projects. Now, it is unfortunate that when it comes to non-traditional security challenges, it's littoral Asia and Africa that are bearing the brunt. And we really have no framework to look at those challenges. We are so focused on the China challenge and on bigger geopolitical and economic challenges that we're really not looking at all of this. That, again, I think is something to bear in mind. And finally, the Taiwan question. My American friends always ask this: what happens if China uses force in Taiwan? And I say then that it could well upset that inclusive apple cart of the Indo-Pacific. I think it's going to be no hold bar, and I think all countries will be forced to take positions if China were to use force in Taiwan. So I leave you with a thought, just a last thought: is it possible that we have reached the point of what is called security optimality in the Indo-Pacific, which means that the difference between the benefits and the costs seem to have been maximized. And from here, we can do what we want, but we're really not going to draw anything more out of the Indo-Pacific and the Quad. This is where it sort of balances out. And so maybe we have, maybe we haven't, but there's one thing is sure: Indo-Pacific remains a work in progress. And to borrow an expression from Robert Frost, I'm going to end here: there is much more to do before we sleep. Thank you so much.